On February 17, 2025, a catastrophic aviation incident occurred in Toronto when Delta Flight 4819 crashed just seconds after attempting to land. This was not a random occurrence. It was the result of a series of errors within the system, from misjudgments about runway conditions to significant shortcomings in air traffic management. While investigators search for the root cause, one crucial question remains ignored. Why do these mistakes continue to happen without any real change? Let's dive into a tragedy that is not just the outcome of uncontrollable factors, but a failure of a system that is becoming increasingly complacent and reckless. And the first truth we must face is this. It wasn't the weather, it wasn't the airplane, but rather the aviation management system that failed to protect the lives aboard Flight 4819, a landing that seemed normal. Landing on runway 23 at Toronto. A snowy day, strong winds. A familiar scene, seemingly nothing different. The runway condition is rated 5.6, a figure that seems safe. But does that really reflect the reality? How many times have we trusted these beautiful numbers on reports, only to forget that in aviation, one wrong number can lead to a silent catastrophe? When safety is just an illusion, it ceases to be safety at all. The question remains, did we ever truly understand that in aviation, every decision, no matter how small, can end in tragedy? The outcome of this seemingly normal landing was an unimaginable shock. The plane touched down with its right landing gear first drifting off the center line. In an instant, the wings scraped the runway and the CRJ-900 started to flip. From the cabin, everything turned chaotic. Passengers were tossed from their seats while the aircraft flipped over on the icy runway. What seemed like a stable landing turned into a life-and-death battle, one that no one was prepared for. The question is, why did a normal landing end up being a horrific crash? Everyone survived, 18 were injured, but the question is not whether they lived or died. The question is, have we ever truly realized that in aviation, every single decision, even the smallest one, can end in disaster? To survive, the system cannot simply rationalize risk. A plane can crash with a force no one expects due to a wrong assessment. The safety system must admit its flaws. It cannot just stand by. Every system in place to protect us must be scrutinized, not just based on near misses, but on the real inevitable dangers hiding behind technicalities. When the runway becomes a grave, why did the plane end up in this situation? The runway condition assessment was just one part of the problem. The real danger lies in the lack of awareness of real-time conditions. One small factor like the angle of approach could throw everything off balance. This isn't just about the runway, it's about poor management and forecasting. Why was there no earlier warning when signs of trouble appeared in the final moments? The system seems to believe that if the numbers check out, the situation is fine. But in reality, the numbers were misleading. This is where the system fails miserably. When the plane hit the runway, the force caused the plane to drift, losing control. The wings scraped the runway, and those seconds turned the aircraft from a mode of transportation into a deadly object. These things don't happen in ideal scenarios, but they always happen in reality, even when the safety reports say everything is fine. These reports are just one part of the system, yet they hide the true risks. The lack of transparency in assessing unpredictable factors that can't be measured by numbers. This is the silent killer behind every crash. Though all passengers survived, this does not change the fact that the system failed. Aviation systems are not invincible. They can be deceived, misled by numbers and standards that are never sufficient to protect human lives. Behind every report is a decision, a political choice that can cost lives simply due to oversight in the coordination and control systems. When safety is just a presumption, it's no longer safety at all. We must stop assuming everything is fine and start acknowledging that a slight mistake can lead to a catastrophe. The system's complacency is a dangerous delusion. 18. Injured. But what's more terrifying? The story of the survivors is not a miraculous tale, but one of a system that could have done better, but didn't. 18 people were injured, but no one died. Yet how many times have aviation organizations grown complacent when no major damage occurs? Every accident can be avoided if we don't just settle for minimizing damage. In fact, damage isn't always measured in lives lost. The biggest damage is the paralysis of trust in the system. When no fatalities occur, the system declares victory, but this victory is hollow when what we call safety is actually safeguarded by luck, not robust planning. I'm not just talking about the plane, I'm talking about a system that people trust. A system based on reports and statistics to assess risks, but cannot gauge the real nature of danger. 18 people were injured due to a hard landing. What if luck hadn't been on their side? Could this have ended differently? This is not the system's win, but a failure to take responsibility for the parts of the system that did not function properly. When we overlook the variables, we are giving up our trust in the one thing that should matter: safety. The quick response of the flight crew and emergency responders is the reason everyone survived. But they cannot replace the weaknesses in the system that failed to predict such a scenario. Every time there's no loss of life, the system calls it a win. But that win is a false one, because we've been conditioned to accept safety based on luck. When you overlook the factors that predict danger, luck will not always stay on your side. Every time we get lucky, we are ignoring the underlying system's failure to act in time. The investigation system and the disquieting silence. Immediately after this crash, both the TSB Canada and the NTSB USA stepped in. But the big question is, why wasn't the system thoroughly checked before the accident? Not one but two mistakes were discovered, and yet no one took responsibility. Everything gets wrapped up in an investigation that takes months without any clear explanation of the real cause. Could it be that the investigation's result is just a play to placate the public? Aviation should be transparent, yet we find that the deeper failures go unnoticed and unpunished. One thing we must acknowledge: these accidents are not isolated events. They are the result of a system unwilling to change. Every conclusion eventually leads to one question: why was this allowed to happen? The reports don't provide a clear answer, and the investigating organizations fail to make specific conclusions that would clarify the real issue. Will we ever dare to face the fact that aviation can easily be run for profit while overlooking true safety? The system continues to justify its failures as though they are isolated, yet the risks keep escalating. The real issue is not the failure of one individual, but the failure of a system that has let these mistakes slide without consequence. When no fatalities occur, the system pats itself on the back. But when something goes wrong, we fail to see the actual flaw: the system's inability to prevent these errors in the first place. Instead of learning from mistakes, it's as if the system prefers to sweep them under the rug, waiting for the next disaster. This is the true price of system complacency. A true tragedy: Washington 67 dead. Less than 3 weeks after the Delta 4899 incident, another catastrophe struck in Washington, D.C. PSA Airlines Flight 5342 was landing at Reagan Airport, and in the same airspace, a Black Hawk helicopter was performing low-altitude training. It seemed like there was no connection between the two, but they shared a small crowded space in the sky, and the lack of proper air traffic management led to the deadly collision. Once again, the question arises: was it the air traffic control system or human failure? The cause is clear: lack of personnel, unclear procedures, and one overworked air traffic controller managing both civilian and military aircraft. This wasn't an isolated mistake. This was the result of poorly managed resources. Every decision is made based on saving costs without giving real consideration to safety. When people talk about efficiency in aviation, do we truly realize that efficiency can be paid for with lives? This system isn't broken because of a single oversight. It's broken because it chooses to prioritize cost saving over human life every time. The outcome was devastating: a mid-air collision resulting in 67 dead. This is the undeniable toll of air traffic mismanagement. But no one really wants to confront the truth that sometimes it is the cost-saving measures in air traffic management that contribute to these horrific disasters. Once again, the question is raised: do we really believe that safety is the priority when it's based on numbers and reports rather than human lives? The people who died that day weren't statistics. They were victims of a system that could have prevented this tragedy but chose not to. The price of lack of control. Flight PSA 5342 was instructed to land on runway 33, but without proper coordination with the Black Hawk helicopter. In theory, these situations should never happen, but they do because the air traffic system fails to separate the two aircraft. What we are witnessing is a deadly design flaw, a system that allows civilian and military aircraft to share the same airspace without adequate separation. It's not just about air traffic control. It's about poor risk management and the failure to realize that such close quarters could lead to a catastrophic collision. The system was flawed long before the crash. The reason for the tragedy is simple cost-saving measures. We can talk about staffing shortages, but the root cause of the problem is the decision to cut corners on staffing and protocols. One person responsible for managing both civilian and military aircraft overwhelmed and unable to catch all the critical interactions. No clear separation between these airspaces led to an inevitable disaster. Saving costs can be beneficial, but not when it means risking lives. The real cost here was the failure to prioritize human lives over profit, and that cost was paid with the lives of 67 people. Aviation systems are not inherently broken, but they become broken when human lives are secondary to financial considerations. The failure to allocate adequate resources to have multiple controllers or better technology led to the loss of 67 lives. Every time we choose to save money by cutting safety measures, we play Russian roulette with people's lives. This is not a random accident, it's a symptom of a system that consistently fails to prioritize safety. The tragic loss of lives wasn't just about the immediate crash, it's about the cost of inaction in improving a fundamentally flawed system. Misidentifying targets, an unacceptable error. The Black Hawk helicopter crew reported visual contact with the target, but was that the right aircraft? They were supposed to be observing the PSA flight, but instead they misidentified the aircraft. This confusion wasn't simply a mistake, it was a fundamental failure in understanding the risks involved. Low-altitude flying, especially at night, is incredibly dangerous, and with limited visibility, misidentification becomes a fatal flaw. This wasn't just an error of judgment, it was a catastrophic flaw in a system that failed to account for the variables in such a high-risk environment. The real problem here is not the pilots, but the technology they rely on. The night vision goggles, which are essential for low-altitude flying, limit the pilot's ability to properly assess the surrounding airspace. The technology that was supposed to save them made them more vulnerable. The glare from city lights also masked the incoming aircraft, making it even harder to see the PSA flight. The blind spot created by the lack of adequate systems led to a misjudgment of the situation, turning a routine flight into a deadly collision. Technology failed, and so did the lives of 67 people. Aviation technology is supposed to protect us, but in this case, it did the opposite. With night vision goggles reducing peripheral vision and city lights obscuring incoming aircraft, the pilots were unable to properly assess the situation. The technology that was meant to save lives became a killer by omission, allowing human error to slip through the cracks. This tragedy wasn't caused by a lack of skill or experience, it was the direct result of inadequate technology and systemic failure. The question is, when we invest in these systems, are we truly considering their limitations, or are we trusting them blindly? The warning system still can't save us. When the system blared traffic in the cockpit, everyone reacted. But did they react in time? The warning came too late. Just a few seconds could have made the difference, but the system failed to prevent the collision. Aviation systems are not foolproof, and warnings, even when they are triggered, are not always enough to prevent disaster. The warning wasn't the final lifeline, it was just another part of the toolset that failed to deliver when it was needed most. The system wasn't capable of stopping the catastrophe, it was only reactive, not proactive. We assume the warning system is our safety net, but it's not. It's just a part of the puzzle, and if everything isn't perfectly synchronized, the warning becomes useless. In the critical moments before impact, those warnings didn't change the outcome. The system didn't act fast enough, and once the planes were within striking distance, nothing could have saved them. The safety system isn't a guarantee, it's a suggestion. In these moments, the system could only offer a weak alert, while the true power to prevent accidents was already lost in the execution of the warning. There's a dangerous illusion in aviation that the system will always protect us, but in reality, technology fails to account for human error, miscommunication, and timing. Warnings are reactive, but by the time they sound, the damage is often done. It's not about the technology failing, it's about the people behind it failing to understand its limitations. Every time we rely too heavily on systems to warn us, we overlook the fact that the true power of safety lies in proactive measures, not just relying on alarms to save us at the last moment. The deadly gap in airspace management. The designated helicopter Route 4 intersects directly with the landing path of Runway 33 at Reagan National. This is not a coincidence. This is a deadly design flaw. The airspace was not properly divided, and there was no clear separation between military and civilian aircraft. When commercial airliners are forced to navigate close to military helicopters in a confined space, it's a recipe for disaster. The air traffic control system was too complacent, assuming that everything would go smoothly, when in fact it was a waiting time bomb for tragedy. The air traffic management system, if not adjusted and clearly separated, will always face risks like this. We can minimize risk, but we can't eliminate it entirely without building better, safer air corridors. Allowing civilian and military aircraft to operate in the same airspace without sufficient separation is an unforgivable mistake. The airspace system needs to be restructured, but instead we continue to gamble with lives hoping for the best. We cannot keep going on this way, assuming every close call is just an exception. Every time it happens, it becomes a lesson that's too costly to ignore. Accidents don't happen by accident. They're the result of repeated small mistakes in procedural management. If the air corridors had been clearly separated, if proper surveillance measures had been in place, this tragedy could have been avoided. To keep aviation running the way it does today, we must demand changes in how we manage airspace. Every time we ignore the risks in favor of convenience, we risk more lives. And the only way to stop this cycle is to stop tolerating systems that are based on good enough instead of the best. We must act before another disaster strikes.
Another roar in the sky. And the story isn't over. Warnings are never too late, but in aviation, they are often ignored. A man walks home and suddenly hears the roar of two massive American jet aircraft and a Black Hawk helicopter. Above, two of them are losing control. This is not a warning for tomorrow. It's a warning for today, for what we've already overlooked. And it's a reminder aviation can be safe, but only if we don't forget the tragedies that have already happened and remain vigilant against dangers we cannot yet predict. When the investigations conclude, causes will be found. But does anyone realize that every loss begins with a decision made at the wrong time? When protocols remain unchanged after each crash, when technology fails to truly save lives, we are stuck in a repeating loop. The critical question is, how long can we accept this cycle? Is the cost of safety, the cowardice of a system too afraid to change until it's too late? Aviation safety is not an absolute metric. It depends on whether we can put ourselves in the position of those passengers in situations where technology simply can't save everyone. To stop the continued loss of life, the aviation system must learn to change before disaster strikes. We cannot live forever in the deception of a false sense of safety because the crashes won't stop. And next time, there may be no survivors left to tell the story.
In the end, the Delta 4899 crash was not just an aviation disaster. It was a wake-up call for a system that had grown complacent and misguided. Every crash is the result of poor decisions, overlooked mistakes, and ignored safety reports. We cannot continue to live under the false belief that technology and procedures will shield us from disaster. The system cannot change unless we confront the truth that its negligence and complacency have cost countless lives. This tragedy is just one of many reminders. It's time for action to ensure we never witness another crash again.